Welcome to Faith, Hope, and Love During an Election. My guest today is Patricia Raybon, who is a friend and a member of my writing guild, and she is the author of several books and devotionals for adults, including My First White Friend, I Told the Mountain to Move, and Undivided. And the subtitle of Undivided is A Muslim Daughter, Her Christian Mother, Their Path to Peace. And I recommend all of her books to you. And also you can find her online at patriciaraybon.com. And she also writes for Our Daily Bread Ministries, and she writes Dayspring's Encourage blog. And we'll put those links up on here so you can follow her. So welcome, Patricia.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here with you today. I was thinking, Jennifer, when we just had this conversation, should I call you Jen or Jennifer? So you know what, I'm going to stick with Jen because that's how we usually communicate. But I was thinking, Jen, when you asked me to be with you today, I first said no. And, I said, I'm not a political scientist. What could I possibly contribute to this time and this conversation? But then I took a minute and thought about it. And in fact, in this time and in this country, especially, everybody, if you're here, is a political scientist. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, I can't say no. Let me show up. And so I'm delighted to have been invited, and I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Well, thank you so much. I'm glad you changed your mind. I was so delighted when I got that follow-up email saying, actually, yes. Well, I thought maybe one thing we could start off by talking about is I recently read a blog post that you wrote for Encourage, and I found it so powerful. And one of the things I love about your writing is that you're very intelligent, and your thinking is always really multifaceted, but you're always able to crystallize big ideas in a way that is really relatable and understandable to readers. And so in this recent post, you were looking at the sort of spirit and climate of chaos and confusion and fear that we find ourselves in at the moment. And as is true in your work, you kind of named the problem, spoke very directly about it, talked about sort of conspiracy theories around the COVID virus and a number of other things. And you also had empathy toward the people who might be spreading some of that, misinformation. And that sort of ability to stand back and to not to kind of demonize or pathologize someone else, but to kind of look at, well, where are they and what is their situation? You talked about in that post about how some of the people who are spreading that are really needing a sense of certainty in this uncertain time, and many of them are also very isolated. So I thought maybe you could describe kind of what brought you to write that blog post and tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah, thanks for asking about that. And there are kind of 3 or 4 layers of thought to the answer. I didn't know how we would approach that particular blog post. But first, I attempt to find something that's topical to write about. For Dayspring writers, we each contribute 1 piece a month, and we have to submit our writing about 3 or 4 weeks ahead. So that makes it a challenge to find something topical, but that's really my preference, because I know people tend to, and this is a writing thing, people just tend to respond more to something that everybody's talking about. Mm-hmm. And so in this moment, a lot of people are looking at these conspiracy theorists and, their ideas about the deep state taking over and whatever their particular, theory of the day happens to be. So I wanted it to be topical, but I also, Jen, have, I guess, a personal philosophy as a writer about never talking down to anybody. And so that particular piece shares some thinking about Gnosticism, the second century idea that that said if you have special knowledge, then you know more than other people, and so you have this advantage because you're smarter and you know more. And in fact, in a faith context, you don't have to. Your redemption isn't dependent on Christ alone because you have this extra layer of knowledge that other people don't have. So I wanted to. I found a theologian writing about that, and I quoted him, and then of course came back to the Bible to talk about what Jesus says when we are afraid. But I had those different things that I try to get on the page so that people, when they find it, feel that they're being spoken to with regard, and that they may be learning something.
Mm-hmm.
And so a couple of people said, thank you for, in the comments, said, thank you for sharing about Gnosticism. I wasn't aware of that. Or, so, I think it gives a piece. So I'm answering your question with the writers in a way that relates to writing, and then in a way that relates to, I guess, the theology of writing, and how a writer operates in the world. And so those are some of the things that I try to get on the page.
Mm-hmm.
So that
I saw that. That's a great answer. I was just thinking as you were speaking that one thing I've noticed too with reading your blog posts and essays is that you really you weave in these different things. You're giving this good information about Gnosticism. You're also talking about current events. You're also talking about the Bible and your own sort of Christian approach to viewing the news and so on. And I don't know if you saw this. I saw this sometime over the last few months, and I don't know who created it, but there was this real simple drawing that I kept seeing people post, on Instagram and so on, of different ways to write an essay or different shapes of essays. And it was just like a sketch. I don't know if you saw that one. And one was like 3, ropes becoming a braid. Another was a spiral. Another was this really winding path. And I think you really vary. I mean, if I had to name one way that you might be represented on that, it would be the braid, because you're braiding together different ideas. But I've also read other things that you've written that feel more like the spiral, where you go out and around and then come back to the center. But do you ever think about, like, as a writer, do you ever think about the shape of the essay you're writing in that kind of a visual form?
Oh, I love that question. The answer is actually no. I don't think that way. Well, let me back up. One of my favorite books, Jen, has nothing to do with writing, has to do with architecture. And it's called Why Things Stand Up. Have you ever seen that?
No, I haven't heard of it.
And I still can't remember how it came across my desk. But anyway, I read the whole thing, and it talked about things like Roman arches and bridges, and where the points are of strength, so the whole thing just doesn't fall down. Mm-hmm. And when I was teaching at University of Colorado at Boulder, teaching essay writing, among other things, in the School of Journalism there, I would share with my students some ideas from that particular book on architecture to remind them that, pretty writing is nice, one might argue, but all writing needs a strong foundation. It needs structure.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So it doesn't, fall apart. Mm-hmm. And that we get that by informing our writing with, as much information that's relevant or challenging or whatever it is that builds it up and gives it heft.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's that other part that's required, in that it needs to just be readable, so that you enter at the point of what I call enter at the point of least resistance.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to start with an illustration, something anecdotal that gets people in the door, and then you can talk about whatever the topic is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I guess I am thinking that I want things to have enough structure that they don't fall down.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You personally,
yeah.
You personally happen to know that I'm. Don't anybody who might watch this tell this story, but you personally know I happen to be working on a novel.
Mm-hmm.
You know that. I'm not going to go on and on about that. But Jen,
something I'm very excited about, by the way.
Thank you.
A little sneak peek of it, and I want everyone just to make a mental note that when you see this book come out and there's fiction, you need to buy it because I love it already.
Thank you. One of the things I've loved about working on it is having to learn what novel structure looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was telling my husband, as we've been talking about it, that I've really enjoyed learning how to build this fictional story. It's not something I tried to do before.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess there is that structural element that I guess I'm always aware of somehow in the attempt to craft an essay that works for readers.
Mm-hmm. Now, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to quickly say that particular essay, I think, has been shared more than any that I've ever written for in the 2 years that I've been at Dayspring and Encourage.
Wow.
So, and I think that actually the topical part of it is what drew most people to it most first. Mm-hmm. And then they found, I'm able to read this and think about it.
Right. And I don't feel, it doesn't feel aggressive, like if you've ever believed any of this information,
you're crazy.
Yeah, right, exactly. And it's very kind of calming, and I love that. I was going to ask you, I know you're working on your novel, and I know you're doing your regular work for Encourage and a number of other things. Do you feel in this time, in these months leading up to the election, in this time post George Floyd's murder, in this time of the pandemic, do you feel like there are like new topics or new things that you want to emphasize in your writing, or do you feel like a sense of mission or purpose as a writer, as an African American woman? How does that interact with the things that you're choosing to write about, your own personal identity, but also this time?
Yes. Well, a few months, sometime in the pandemic, I saw an article or something that asked the question, what's your primary writing goal? Mm-hmm. And so I just at that moment typed out, in fact, I put it here on my little computer stand. My primary writing goal is to humanize people, especially African American. And so, that's how I wrote it. I put it on my computer stand. And then I realized that's what I think I've been doing. I mentioned my husband this morning. We were talking about Black Lives Matter and how hard that concept has been for some people. And I said to him, I like what young people say, no lives matter until Black Lives Matter. Mm-hmm. And because of what's happened to Black lives in the world and certainly in this country. And so behind, I think, a lot of things that I feel blessed to write or invited to write or find myself writing is probably that idea that there's a humanity in everybody's story, and part of our work as people navigating the planet is to give enough grace to find out from other people what that is, even if their views are different. And what is your story? Why do you think that way? And for those of us who write, that can be a very rich kind of territory to walk around in. And I was telling somebody just yesterday, I went to a where was it? It was one of these ministries. They have kind of annual or retreats for their writers, or every couple of years or whatever. And at this one particular retreat, the whole first day, people were just going from couch to couch, table to table, basically saying, "What is your story? Tell me your story. I see you here with your name tag on, but I want to know your story." And so the organizers just made room in that first day for that meet and greet, but in such an intentional way that when you left after 2.5 days, I really felt like I knew people.
Right.
And more than on a surface level.
And it's really
you've done that with our ink group, with the
I hope so.
weekly calls.
And I think too, when you know another person's story, it makes it much more difficult to look down on them, or to immediately think they're wrong, or that whatever their ideas or whatever, that you can't listen to them. But once you know their story, you begin to see how they were constructed, and how their thinking was constructed, and how their life experiences affected them. And I love that. What's your story? That's really a cool beginning. And in terms of what you were saying about hearing the stories and humanizing people involved with Black Lives Matter, I mean, when we're talking about like protests and so on, something you said on that, you gave the presentation for the evangelical,
Evangelical Press Association.
That's right, EPA. Okay, and during that presentation, which I found very moving, and I took pages and pages of notes, I think I told you that, but you showed slides of people exiting stores after having looted the stores. And you said, I want to know why, I forget where the things were, that the items that were in the carts, but you said, I want to know why that person has 2 toasters, or, and I want to know, I want to know the stories behind these people. And so instead of, I think some people, they see an image and they don't think about what is the human story behind that. And you invited everyone listening to turn it around and say, okay, well, why are they there? And why do they need?
Why is this young man carrying out a infant seat? At one particular picture, the young man had a box that had an infant seat in it.
And so what's his story?
What is his story?
Yeah.
Part of that has to do with coming through coming out of a school of journalism. I can't remember, are either of your degrees are any of your degrees in journalism?
No, my master's is in English with creative writing, but I did end up writing a newspaper column for a while, but I didn't have any, journalistic training.
Well, one of the things that happens in journalism school is this requirement that as a student of journalism, which derives from the French word day, right? Which encourages us to look at the everyday realities of people, and then find a story angle and come back and write it. And so I could imagine during that protest time when people were looting Target for example, that a story that an editor back at the news desk would understand is one that said, wait a second, who are these people who are looting while bullets are flying and you know, all this other chaos is happening? Who are these people going into Target, running out with a floor rug, you know, or the two toasters? What is their story? And I can imagine, and I've had some wonderful editors who would say, I love that, go get it. You know, because it requires that we get under the pavement and learn more about the everyday lives of people instead of just judging.
Right.
And so, you know, when I did, speaking of Dayspring, I did a blog post for Encouraged that said, should we love or should we judge young looters or learn to love them? And boy, there's a lot of reaction to that piece because a lot of people, based on where they get their news, have been primed to see these people as just horrible, you know. And maybe, you know, they were saying, you don't know, they're probably selling that stuff on eBay, and, you know, and they may be, but even if they are, why? You know, can we stop a little bit? And I think it's a very Jesus thing to ask those kinds of questions. And, you know, I just can imagine, and I think I might have even said that at that EPA webinar. I can imagine Jesus, those are the people Jesus would talk to, you know, and ask a Jesus-like question.
Right. No, and I hope there are journalists asking, you know, talking to people and getting those stories. I can imagine there probably are some who are, you know, creating an anthology or something. If no one is, I hope someone will, of these stories and
pandemic stories.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I don't know whether you have the same perspective about this, but it feels like there's this perfect storm of, you know, having everyone at home watching the news, their lives disrupted by the pandemic, and sort of all these things are becoming revealed that were hidden to, for instance, as a white person, I of course knew that our country was built on racism and on, you know, disempowering people who are Black and brown and of color. And of course I knew that. But the depth to which I've come to understand it and see it revealed in institutions and in practices is completely different over the last several months. And I feel like, you know, I keep in a curious way going, what things will remain after this time? You know, what things will change? What things will remain? How will I and others who were, you know, ignorant of so much, how will we be changed, and how will our actions be changed? And I don't know, do you feel hope about these things, or do you feel, you know, yeah, I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, I do feel hope. I love the fact that people are using the word reckoning, that we're in a racial reckoning, which, as I understand it, means that people are recognizing, just as you said, in a new way, why people are in the street protesting, and or in the context of our country, how it was built, how it was conceived and built, and how the nature of that has meant for 400 years, a lot of people have struggled with a knee on their neck. Now, a lot of people get that. The challenge will be a lot of what happens after that will be determined in the election, and how that turns out, I think. And at the same time, I'm hopeful that we'll never go back to the way we were. We may not move forward at a pace or at a distance that we don't like, but I think it will be impossible to go back to the way it was before.
Right.
And so a lot of people will really rise to that and get the most out of it. I think about our church in Denver. We've had virtual services every Sunday. And Jen, our pastor has preached. I mean, he has preached some remarkable sermons. This past Sunday, I turned to Dan and I said, he needs to put those in a book. Pandemic sermons. They have been so good. And so it'll be interesting to see in his case, if after we get back together all physically in the church, if that level, he's already a passionate person, but if that level of passion that we've seen during the pandemic, for example, will continue. Or if the level of connection that people have shared with these Zoom calls that we've all been on will continue. I think I've talked to more people in deeper ways during this time than I ever have.
Yeah.
And I was joking with my oldest granddaughter about the background that everybody has, a special background. I love, even when we're watching the news, CNN or, I'm kind of looking at their background because we're inside their homes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of that, I love your background. I've seen it many times now, but I love how, we were just talking about design and architecture and I love, it's very kind of pleasing on the eyes, like that, the books there and so on. I'm always kind of looking around your
It's so fun. So something has happened. And
reckoning and revelations of things and
right.
Yeah. It is.
I just this morning I heard I received an email from a woman saying, I heard you say that you want your white friends to not just say I'm not a racist, but to say I'm anti-racist. And I'm actively working to disrupt racism.
Right.
And so she was saying, what does that exactly does that mean? And so I was thinking, these are the questions that people are talking about and wrestling with in a new way. And of course, there's pushback from people who don't want to abandon the old path. But I am, in terms of hope, you mentioned that, I'm encouraged by what I see.
Yeah. I was on a call recently, of course, another Zoom thing with one of my editors and a number of writers who had also published with this house. And one of the people on the call who's an amazing thinker and writer, and she said, she's an African-American woman, and she said, what everyone needs to be asking themselves is, what have I done today that helped disrupt or dismantle systemic racism? And also, and I loved this even more because it was such a thought that now has stayed with me so much, but like, what am I willing to sacrifice in order to do that? And also, what idea of myself or my culture am I willing to let go of in order to do that? And those thoughts just felt so clarifying and such a call to action. And I loved the way she put those thoughts together.
I love that.
Yeah.
And speaking, I mentioned my pastor. his sermon on Sunday was on what we do after the amen, action after the amen.
Mm-hmm.
So he was using the pandemic as a context and inviting people to think about that.
Mm-hmm.
And so he mentioned the story in Exodus where Moses is at that precipice moment of taking the nation of the Hebrew nation through the Red Sea. And he has prayed and he has said his amen. And then the Lord basically says to him, okay, tell the people, get moving. We've had the prayer, we've said the amen, we've been in this moment, get moving. Mm-hmm. And so I think a lot of people are saying, okay, even if that means that I have to leave behind parts of my own life, my own thinking, my old self, my own understanding about things. Mm-hmm. Let me this is an Isaiah, I think, when Isaiah tells the people, the Lord is doing a new thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
And so, can't you see it?
Yeah. That's one of my favorite verses. I love that. And our friend and colleague, Vivian Mabuni has, yes. I was saying that, I was on a call with her and I mentioned that verse and she got up from her chair, pulled down this plaque and held it up, and she has that.
She has that in her office.
Yeah. I was going to say though, that would make a really terrific blog post for your Encourage series, like the amen and then let's go, that.
Yeah.
That really good sort of anchor for one of those posts. But
yeah, and just one other thing about that scripture is interesting because the people at that time were just enamored with the fact that they had been delivered. Mm-hmm. And with their Red Sea deliverance. And Isaiah is saying to them, yeah, that was great, but the Lord is doing a new thing. Can't you see it?
Yeah.
And so it's I think that's saying we are hearing that same invitation and opportunity in this extraordinary time that we are in.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I would love to hear, related specifically to where we are in terms of, last night the Democratic National Convention started. We're just really getting close to this election. I would love to hear any thoughts you have on Joe Biden picking Kamala Harris as his running mate, what that means to you, what that could mean for our country, and just any perspective you want to offer about that.
Thank you. A couple of things. I'm excited about the Democratic ticket and very excited about Kamala Harris's being a part of it. I love that I had to learn how to pronounce her name properly. And I love that lesson. We need to always do that in this country where people come from so many places. Mm-hmm. I noticed yesterday reading something, my grandchildren go to a suburban school district near Denver. The number of languages spoken, 150 languages spoken among the children in that school district. And so Kamala Harris to me personifies that, the level of difference in the country and the opportunity to learn about all this difference and all these different people. In learning about her, we get to learn, we have the opportunity to learn more about all kinds of things and ways, and I love that. I love that Michelle Obama wore a necklace that said "Vote," and apparently that necklace, I guess you can't find it. People bought it out wherever it's for sale. But I remember that in 2016, a lot of people did not vote. And that's, I think, in a democracy, a naive response to not liking 100% a particular ticket. But in these times, as citizens, one must choose. To stay home and not vote is not a choice. And so, you know, we saw that what happened last time. And so, you know, I think the Michelle Obama necklace reminds us of how important it is to get out and vote. And then there was a theme to the first night of the Democratic Convention that I loved, and that was or is we the people.
Yeah.
You know, in order to create a more perfect union. And so, you know, I love that that outlook and that reminder of citizenship and why it matters. When I mentioned journalism school a lot today for some reason, but when I was in school as a student and when I was teaching, there was a text that now is considered a classic. It's called The Elements of Journalism. And one of the things it said is that the work of journalism is about informing people in a way that enables them to become we the people, that enables them to become community. Mm-hmm. And your sister-in-law used a phrase about being a civic actor. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, this is the stage now. Let's all get on the stage and act and do our part. You know, all those words fall in. But you know, I think that was what we were hearing last night at the convention. And I think this recording may come later, but in terms of the upcoming election, I'm you know, encouraged that as hard as it's going to be to vote, perhaps. I love what Michelle Obama said, you know, grab your comfortable shoes and get your mask on and, you know, pack your brown bag dinner or breakfast or whatever it is and stay in line as long as it takes. My state has, we've been voting by mail forever with no problem. We get to vote by mail. But, you know, I pray that the voting option is not compromised for people and that people get out and vote.
Yeah, voter suppression seems to be an obvious tactic that, you know, this administration is using. To see post boxes locked and closed or picked up from the street and put in a warehouse.
Who would imagine?
Never. Yeah, never. Yeah. And it's funny, you know, I think probably for you and I as writers, especially before we would always, now we just email everything, but, you know, I've been writing long enough that the mail is always this high point of the day sometimes because, you know, I was always waiting for, you know, I'd send from college onward, you know, send a poem to a literary journal and you always enclose that self-addressed stamped envelope. And, you know, I was always looking for the mail and mailing things. And I have such a huge love of it because of that relationship to it as a writer too. And then when the letter that you've been looking for, you know, comes and it's so exciting to tear it open. And yeah, the thought that that's being compromised in terms of voter suppression, in terms of, you know, I take a daily medication and I get that by mail.
By mail. Yeah.
And
but my late father-in-law was a mailman for years.
Oh, wow.
When they used to walk the route, you know, and he had favorite people on the route who would, you know, give him a refreshment along the way or whatever else. I don't know. But, you know, he was beloved and for that job. And, isn't it interesting that people are saying, wait a second, this particular agency really matters to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so we are learning these things during this very odd time. We're learning what matters, and that's a good thing.
And who matters?
And who matters?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, I so appreciate that you took the time today. I know how busy you are. I know that in this pandemic time alone, because you write devotionals and you write content that encourages people and that helps them to think and helps them to approach difficult issues in a gentle way. I know that you've been so busy with your writing, and so I appreciate you taking the time to talk in this series.
Thank you. I'm so honored that you invited me, and I'm excited to watch all of these conversations that you and Brian Elaine are having. I've watched 3 of them so far, and all of them have just been excellent.
He's also doing it in a podcast form, so that if someone prefers to have it, so I think he's just loading up a podcast probably in order from his other series that I think both of us also did of writing in trying times. And so I've actually, my own kids, a couple weeks ago when I told them that I was going to be doing this, said, oh, people don't want to watch this, they want to listen as a podcast. And so I reached out to Brian and said, have you thought about doing it? And he was, of course, 10 steps ahead, and he had already started that. So that's another good thing about this series, and listen to it that way.
Brian Elaine, the man who never sleeps. That I tease him.
Yeah, he is very productive, to say the least. Yeah.
Well, I love the podcast idea, and I hope that when that gets launched, that people will listen and enjoy.
Yeah, I do too. Well, thank you again, and all best to you and your whole family in this time.
You too, Jennifer. Take care.
All right, bye.
Bye.